Hi, I'm Tom Shoemaker, and I'll be facilitating the series Reading Alone Together. To get you ready for that series, this video is going to give you some sense of why we're doing what we're doing and how we're going to go about doing it. It's a little background information. So let's start with the idea that out there in the wider world, there are over 100 scriptures being used by various religious traditions. Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, the Sikhs. The list of traditions out there is long, and each has a scriptural tradition of its own. And those don't even begin to include the ancient traditions, the ancient writings, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Inanna's Descent to the Underworld. All of those texts that are no longer being used, but once were. And it still doesn't include all of the oral traditions out there. You can think of them as a scriptural tradition without writing. The Hopi of Arizona, the Arrernte of the outback of Australia, the African tribal traditions passing along stories that have been passed on for generations and centuries. Each of those functions as a scripture. But of all of this, 3 stand apart from all others. 3 are the most widely read. The Hebrew Bible, Christians call that the Old Testament, the New Testament of Christianity, and the Qur'an of Islam. We're going to delve into those a bit, but it's interesting to ask the question right up front, who owns those texts? And the simple answer, well, the Jews have the Hebrew Bible, and the Christians have the New Testament, and the Muslims have the Qur'an, isn't going to be enough for us. Within Islam, for instance, there are multiple groups that claim to be the ones who rightly understand the Quran, who own the understanding. The Sunnis don't believe that the Shiites read the book correctly. The Shiites don't believe the Sunnis read the book correctly. And most of us are unaware of the fact that there are other groups like the Ibadi or Ahmadiyya or the Druze who read it their own way and believe all of the other groups are incorrect. There's even Baha'i, which doesn't count as an Islam but grew out of Islam and read the text that the Muslims read and believes that it alone understands what the text is really trying to do. And if you can do that with Islam, you can do it with Christianity. Catholics read the text, believe that they have the right understanding of the text. Protestants, evangelicals, they read the text and believe that they have the right understanding of the text. Each group, the Orthodox, the Pentecostals, the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Christian Scientists, all believe that they read the text and they own the understanding of that book. You can do it with Judaism, with the Haredi on the far right and Oradam on the far left. Everyone wants to claim to own the book. But who owns it, really? I don't know. We're not here to answer that question. We respect the fact that Muslims read the Quran of all kinds of tradition. Christians of all varying forms read the New Testament. Jews, all along that spectrum, read the Torah and the rest of the Hebrew Bible. We respect that they get from it what they get from it. But the question at hand is, what happens if you tell all of them to back up? Each wants to tell us that there's a perspective, there's a set of beliefs that has to be there for you to get the true understanding of the text. I understand why they say that. But what happens if I ask them, don't tell me your beliefs, let me read the text first. Let me read the text apart from what you say I have to know before I read the text. And let me just read the text for what it is. Let me just read the Hebrew Bible as though I'm not accepting or having to accept Judaism or Christianity as my guide. Let me read the Gospels without Christianity telling me what I have to see there, or the Quran without Sunnis or Ibadi or Ahmadiyya telling me what I have to see there. What do I discover? And that's what this series is all about. You see, the simple truth is they practice something that we all should be aware of. We bring something to a text. A text in and of itself isn't complete. A text by itself, whether it's the Torah of the Hebrew Bible or the Gospels of the New Testament or the Quran or any other text, the text itself doesn't tell us what it says. It only lays it out and asks you to enter into a relationship with it. So you bring with it whatever you bring with it. You may bring your religious beliefs, and your religious beliefs color then what you see in the text. If you believe that God is all-knowing, then you're going to see that as you unfold the Hebrew Bible or the Qur'an. If you do not believe, if you do not buy that insistence that God is all-knowing, you're going to see the stories in a completely different way. Let me see if I can give some examples. Take that story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now, I don't know how much you know about these stories or don't know about these stories. So along the way, in this series, we're going to have to keep fleshing out. You can't simply say, just like Noah. We're going to say, let's talk about Adam and Eve. And they're the first man and first woman. And God put them in a garden, and He called that garden pleasure. And there in the Garden of Eden was a tree. And God told Adam, don't eat the fruit of that tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because on the day you eat of it, that very day you will drop dead. Well, a little while later, Eve, the woman, she walks up to the tree, and the snake says, did God tell you not to eat the fruit of this tree? And she said, not just to eat it, we're not even supposed to touch it, because the day we do, we'll die. And the snake says, you won't die. God knows that the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll know good and evil just like He will. So the woman looked at the fruit, thought it was pretty, thought it might taste good, took a bite. She turned and she gave some to her husband, and he ate some too. Well, with that, God shows up on the scene a little while later and says, what is this you've done? And they end up having to leave the Garden of Eden. Now, that story from a religious standpoint, for Christians it has been the root story of the problem of humanity. That in that moment, Adam and Eve disobeyed God's command, and they were banished from paradise. They were separated from God in some way. And ever since then, it's been the human yearning to come back and be joined back together with God. And of course, Christians say that happens through the cross of Jesus Christ. But wait. All of that assumes something about this story. It assumes, for instance, that when God says, don't eat the fruit of that tree or you will drop dead, what God is saying is, I will kill you. It doesn't say that in the story. It is entirely possible that God didn't know. The story doesn't tell us that God is all-knowing. That's a religious perspective that's brought to the story. So what happens if God doesn't know? What if He looks at it and says, oh, no. You can't handle the truth. And then when they eat the fruit of the tree, God, instead of being upset about it, says, whoa, maybe you're ready. After all, I made you to be farmers, right? Go back and read the text. That's exactly what He did. I made you to be farmers, so now you're ready. You can go out into the world and do what you need to do. And don't worry so much now. Instead of God punishing the people because He's angry, God says, relax. I will give you all kinds of children to help you out there. I'll give you sexual desire to make sure that you're reproducing. And by the sweat of your brow, you will eat every day of your life. Now the story takes on a completely new meaning. Now, I don't know what religion is going to teach that particular perspective, but what I know is if you push everybody back and you ask the questions, you can see it differently. The reason this happens is because there are gaps in a text. These are narratives. Whether we're talking the Hebrew Bible, the Gospels of the New Testament, or even the Qur'an, they are narratives. Each is very different from the other. They read differently. And we'll talk about that as the series unfolds. But each is a narrative. Each does have something threading it together. And inside every single narrative are narrative gaps. Gaps are that place between the sentences, the details that aren't told, that weave the details together. Let's go back to that Adam and Eve story. For instance, what details are we not told? We're not told why a snake is talking. And so we try to fill that gap in. Is the snake unique among all other snakes? Is the snake at that point capable of speech and we just weren't told that the snake was capable of speech? Who is that snake? Is that snake, as Christianity will come to believe, Satan himself? Or is that snake, and catch this one, the goddess Asherah? That's a possibility I may get a chance to unfold for you when we're talking inside the series. Or is the snake just a snake? And what kind of fruit did they eat after all? Throughout history, people have speculated. It doesn't tell us. It just says they ate the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And I'd like to know, what is the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil? Is it a fig? Is it a pomegranate? Or is it an apple? John Milton thought it was the apple. But many other people have thought the other two. They certainly covered themselves up with fig leaves, so I'm thinking it might be the fig, but we don't know that for sure. And how did the woman know that they weren't supposed to eat of the fruit of the tree? Was it because the man told her that they weren't supposed to eat of the fruit of the tree? And now here's the case there. Is she thinking that the man just doesn't know what he's talking about? Or did God himself tell the woman, don't eat the fruit of that tree? Because what she said to the snake is different. We're not even allowed to touch it. And that is not what God told the man. And then why, when they're leaving the garden, does the man turn to the woman and says, I'm going to call you Chava, that's Eve in Hebrew. Chava, because you are the mother of life itself. He names her life. Is this the story of a man who has just received all kinds of negative judgment? We're not told these things. We're not told exactly whether God was playing a game with them or whether God was discovering along the way. These are narrative gaps. And there are narrative gaps all over the Bible. Every single story has to have narrative gaps. For instance, Cain and Abel. If Cain kills his brother Abel, that happens just another next story over. If Cain kills his brother Abel, did he know that murder was wrong? Did God tell anybody up until that point, don't be killing each other? Or did he just think that that was a natural thing to do? And then what kind of a mark was it that God put on Cain? It wasn't to condemn him. It was to protect him. So what he put on, one of those things that says, don't touch, don't touch. We don't know. And of course, any kid knows the narrative gaps question. Where did Cain get his wife when he wandered away? Was it his sister? Or were there other people out there? That's what we're going to be doing. Each one of these 3 days, we're going to ask to step back from everybody else's religious perspective and just look at this narrative. Stories mostly, but sometimes not story. Narrative. And ask questions. And it's a freewheeling questioning process. Some of the very best answers that deal with the text come from questions that I never imagined I hear students ask them. For instance, the question that was once asked many, many years ago about Cain and Abel. Abel sacrificed an animal. Wait, the narrative question? Were they allowed to eat meat? Because God had said no. So why is he raising sheep? Go back to the story. Abel is sacrificing an animal, kills an animal and cooks it, and it makes God so happy. And Cain, who's the first person ever to sacrifice, he sacrifices plants and God doesn't pay attention. So now the question is, does Cain think in his head, something has to die in order for him to be happy? And he calls Abel, his brother, out into the field to kill him. You see, we're going to ask these hard questions. That question got asked in a classroom. And I think it's profound for this story. Was Abel Cain's sacrifice? Okay, we'll do this with each of the 3 traditions. But along the way, I need to counsel you on something. Number 1, this is not an attack on Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. This is not an attack on reading the text with a religious perspective. This is a recognition that in order to read a text, you have to bring something to it. They bring what they bring to the text. But a text, once published, belongs to the world. And anybody with any perspective, a Jew can read the Qur'an. A Jew can read the Gospels. A Christian can read the Qur'an. A Christian can read the Gospels. Anyone, an atheist, can read anybody's texts. And when you do, you still bring something of yourself to it. Rather than condemn somebody else for bringing what they bring to it, we're asking a question, can we bring something of our own? Here's the trick. There is a magic question in here that people ask about these texts. What does it mean? We don't care about that question. What we care about is a slightly different question that opens the whole world up for us. What can it mean? The first one assumes that there is one understanding, and there becomes a battle over who has the correct understanding, and the one with the correct understanding is the one who owns the book. But the second one understands that depending on what you bring, on what I bring, on what they bring, there's always going to be a new understanding. So it's not just what does it mean, it's what can it mean. I like hearing you tell me what you see it mean. I like hearing her tell me what she sees it mean. I like that conversation that happens when we all share together what can it mean. That's what we'll be striving for throughout this series. So come, I'll supply the text right then and there. We'll spend a few minutes reading, we'll spend a few minutes bouncing around, we'll throw up all kinds of questions, and we'll see if we can't weave them together into at least 2 or 3 or 4 different "what can the story mean" answers. I'll see you starting in October.